Welcome to the Westchester, excuse me. I'm a member of that group too. Welcome to the New York Buddha Dharma Center. What's today? Today's Monday. Yeah, I just spoke up in Westchester yesterday. Oh boy. So we are working our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. And for those of you who don't know, we are in the tradition here, the Kagyu Nyingma tradition, and the founders of this center, our teacher was Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Kagyu teacher, but his root guru, his Sawe Lama, was Nyingma. So we partake of both lineage streams. And Chogyam Trungpa, every year while he was here in this country, except for a couple of years, took his students away, a group usually ranging in size from maybe 125 up to 250, for 3 months. And we rented different facilities, usually out-of-season ski resorts or the like, because they were cheap out of season and beautiful. And so the first one of these, we called them seminaries, Vajradhatu seminaries. And the seminary, the first one was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, actually in Teton Village, the ski area. And the second one was in Snowmass, and third in Snowmass. And we had one up in Chateau Lake Louise, Canada, and another one in Pennsylvania, and some other places. Up at Shambhala Mountain Center. It was it used to be called Rocky Mountain Dharma Center in Colorado, rural retreat. And during these 3-month periods, there would be periods when it was nothing but sitting, about half the time, but the sitting period, those times would vary in length. Sometimes you might sit all day every day for about a week, others for all day every day for 3 days. And in between, there would be study periods when there would be classes. And especially at night, Trungpa Rinpoche would give lectures. And during the day, some of his students would run classes as well. Now, those 3-month periods were divided into the Hinayana teachings, the Hinayana period, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. The Hinayana is the foundational level of the path, the Mahayana is the middle level of the path, and the Vajrayana is the tantric or more advanced level of the path. The teachings that he gave during the Hinayana and Mahayana periods were there were transcripts of his talks, and they were made available, and anybody could buy them. But the Vajrayana was restricted, and he left instructions after his death at some suitable time in the future, those Vajrayana teachings would become unrestricted and would be available. And this happened a few years ago, and Judith Leaf, who is one of his editors, compiled and edited all of the seminary transcripts, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, into a 3-volume set called The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And this is a bit of a pun, that title, because Chogyam Trungpa's name, the first part, Chogyam, is actually an abbreviation of Chökyi Gyamtso, and abbreviated to Chogyam, and Chökyi Gyamtso means Ocean of Dharma. That was his name. Those of you who have taken refuge, everybody has a refuge name, and if you haven't taken refuge, if you do, you'll get one, and that was his. So this is the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, and we are working our way through it, the first volume, the so-called Hinayana volume, and this is actually the second to last talk. The next time we do this, it'll be the last talk. And then we're going to consider what to do next. We're planning a course on cutting through spiritual materialism. And at some point, we're going to get into the Mahayana volume as well. So this chapter is chapter 68, second to the last chapter of the Hinayana volume. And it's called Cutting Through the Numbness of Ego. That was quite a bit of a prelude. So when you're meditating, as we just did, and you're trying to cut through your discursive thoughts into the clarity of awareness of this space, perhaps the awareness of the breath going out, and you may feel it's difficult to do, that you're obstructed, that you can't quite cut through thoughts. They keep sort of coming, blurring, and after a while they seem like they're almost always there in the background or the foreground. And the reason is that this is the intrusion of one's I, or me. It's all these thoughts are about I, or me, the hero or the heroine of our thoughts. This sense of I produces discursive thoughts, and vice versa. These discursive thoughts stimulate the sense of I. And eventually, you sort of become numb to it. You're sort of sitting here and the thoughts are coming and going. Sometimes you might have some clarity, but you get numb as you sort of watch your hallucinatory discursive thought show. And you get all sorts of things, dreams that are visual, auditory, intellectual distortions. And this is what is called, this whole process is what is referred to as samsara. It's circular. It just goes around and around from those thoughts. Sometimes can be pleasurable, sometimes they can be very painful. But they always are about I, and they always carry some sense of anxiety, however faint, even the pleasurable ones. There's a faint touch of anxiety that the pleasure won't last, much less the painful thoughts that carry all kinds of anxiety. And the way in which we deal with them is through the practice of meditation, and the first practice that we do is shamatha. There are two basic practices, shamatha practice and vipassana. Shamatha practice is the practice of focusing one's mind one-pointedly, as it were, on an object. And the object can be anything. Typically, it might be the breath. That's for Buddhists. If you're practicing TM, it'll be a mantra, a sound. The sound has no meaning, and if you give it meaning, you're just complicating the whole process unnecessarily. It's really just an object of awareness. It could be a physical object in front of you, like a statue of the Buddha, for instance. And again, if you give it meaning, the religiosity, you're just complicating the process unnecessarily. Could be a stick of wood in front of you. And in fact, there are practices, that's stone, yeah. There are practices that you might do, quite advanced ones, where you do use a stick of wood, believe it or not, an actual stick. And so the idea, though, is that you're focusing the mind, cutting through thought, and that you're using this object to bring you back into the present moment, out of the past and the future, which is what thoughts are always about. Now, this practice has three main virtues, shamatha. One is, for people who've rarely meditated or never meditated, they become aware of the extent to which they are spending their lives lost in thought. And they begin to see that there's an alternative. This is something we've all gone through, probably, and continue to go through, because it's amazing, at least to me, speaking for myself, the extent to which I walk the streets of this city lost in thought, and then finally sort of realize that I'm doing it, even after all these years. Much less people who've never meditated and who don't even realize that there is an alternative. The second virtue is that it comes in the name of shamatha. Shamatha means abiding in peace. In Tibetan, it's shine, which means the same thing, abiding in peace, resting in peace. And the peace is that you are cutting through thought, because thought is very anxious. Thought is always about the past and the future. Thought always is about hope and fear, good and bad, judgment, wanting something different than one has or had, wanting to avoid pain, wanting to inculcate or pursue pleasure. And so thought is always very tense, anxious. More than that, the very idea of I is fraught with anxiety. Me and my well-being, me and my life, me and my death, me and my impending death, me and my tragedies, me and my unhappiness, me and my loss. It is awful. You got it. So the very notion of I, which permeates thought, is itself unhappy. And so thought itself is driven by this kind of unhappiness. Even when we're having happy thoughts, there's the suspicion that it might not last. And that's a kind of tinge of unhappiness that colors even pleasurable thoughts. And so shamatha gives us a rest from that, because we cut through thought, we come back and we rest in the space of this present moment, which is devoid of all that. And the third benefit of shamatha, and the last really, is that we begin to develop familiarity with our mind. You begin to develop familiarity with boredom, which is very important, that you begin to tolerate boredom, that you can actually sit and let boredom course through you and not be moved, not feel like you have to go, get up and go do something, entertain yourself, somehow allay the boredom. It's a real talent and that we can sit here like rocks, like fortresses, and let that boredom and all the thoughts and with their unhappiness course through us and evaporate into the space. So that's one of the main advantages, that it's a kind of an ability to focus, to become aware, and we're cultivating this talent or this capacity to let boredom flow through us, and at the same time to focus our awareness in the present moment. Most people, or many people, are just flipping from one thought to the next, just lost, and we do that too. So what we're practicing is the ability to stop doing that, to cut that, and to come into the present. The second practice that we do, and we did a hybrid of both of these practices just now, is vipassana. Vipassana is the practice, instead of being focused on one thing, like the mantra, the sound, the breath, the stick of wood, the image of the Buddha, whatever it might be, one's awareness is environmental. It's spatial. It's wide. Trungpa Rinpoche called it panoramic awareness. We come back effortlessly because, you see, it's already part of what we are. It's actually the foundation of our very being, this kind of wide open awareness, cognition. So it's not so much that we practice this as that we come back to it. It's already there, waiting for us. Now, when we come back, especially in the beginning, and the beginning can last a long time, but when we come back, there may be that little voice saying, now you're doing it, now you're not. And so it turns it into an artificial kind of practice. But eventually we begin to realize that we don't have to do a damn thing. That all we have to do is remember to come back and relax into this open awareness that was already there, was always waiting for us. And this is what Vipassana is. And we today practiced a hybrid of these two, working with the breath going out into the environment, into the space, and dissolving there. And so what we're doing is, when we breathe out with the out-breath like that, you're breathing out you. You're breathing out I. I goes out with it. All my thoughts are going out, riding the breath, are the breath. And as the breath dissolves into space, so do the thoughts. And at the end of that out-breath, and you let it go out far, at the end of that out-breath, there's a pause. And in that pause, it's really beyond I and other, beyond practice, beyond doing. It's just pure, simple awareness. And if you think about that, then you got to let that go too. So you just let it go. Trungpa Rinpoche called it a gap. Just letting go of all control. The breath goes out, dissolves, gap. So these are the two practices. He says here, I'll give him a quote, when you begin to realize and understand that I doesn't really exist. See, I is just a story that we tell ourselves about the past and the future. And when you come present, in the present moment, There is no story. There's no room for it. That's what coming present means. So we're constantly doing that. We're constantly letting go of the story, coming present into pure, simple awareness. And that means we're letting go of I. And we're actually experiencing egolessness. Now, there are lots of arguments that we could go through about why I doesn't exist. They're sort of philosophical, logical arguments, that it's just a fiction. But the best way, and he says this in this chapter, is to actually experience it. That way you begin to actually know it. And the way you experience it is simply going out, dissolve, and here you are, in this awareness of the space, with everything arising in it. This is so important. It's like key. It's like the heart of our practice to do this. He talks about this I-ness, this me-ness that comes back again and again. It has a quality of heaviness, this me-ness. And he says, whenever one says I, there is a lack of self-confidence. One is asserting oneself with a bit of frustration and unfriendliness. You know, you're sort of anticipating pushback from other. I want, I think, I know. And there's this sense of lack of confidence, of uneasiness about that assertion of me. And he says, when you say I, you are expressing klesha. Whenever you say I, klesha is like passion, jealousy, arrogance, pride, aggression, hatred, all of these emotions having to do with other. When you hate somebody, you hate somebody. You hate something. When you have pride, you want everybody to praise you. There's this constant relationship between I and other. And he says, when you say I, whenever you say I, you're expressing some kind of klesha, some kind of aggression, passion, jealousy, arrogance towards other, even if it's an imaginary other. So the shamatha discipline of mindfulness, that's another name for shamatha, mindfulness. We're mindful, we come back from dreams, can cut through the basic ignorance of I. And by paying attention to it, you can begin to see the freshness and the clarity of this space of the present world as it arises. And then he says, after that, vipassana, this environmental awareness, cuts through the wantingness. You experience the totality of this space. You can do that. And it doesn't have to be you experiencing it. In fact, it's better if you get out of the way, because the space is just doing it for you. He says, the idea of discriminating awareness, which is another word for wisdom, which develops out of vipassana, is that this awareness becomes a natural state of being rather than a person developing awareness. That is so terrific. It's not like you or I have to become aware. It's a natural state of being that we plug back into, and we get out of the way. It's most powerful, most vivid when I shuts up. He said it is not important for you to develop awareness. What you are aware of is more important. That is how you step out of egohood. And then there's this terrific metaphor that he gives for it. He says, when you develop awareness of this environment, there is no one who is aware. That's amazing. It is like a movie screen without an audience. It is like a television in an empty room. That should be engraven on your eyeballs. That should be something you put on the refrigerator and see again and again. It is like a movie screen without an audience, that awareness. It's like a television in an empty room, because you don't need I. I only obscures it. Any comments? I just thought this was amazing. Ben? Huh? I can be on the screen. Then you bring your thoughts and awareness, thoughts and everything into awareness. But that's a tricky one, because you can get lost in them really fast. But yeah, you can, whatever comes up in your mental events, you can also bring to awareness. He says, when you are self-conscious, you become deaf and dumb. You don't see or hear things. You are so concerned with this that you don't see or hear anything else. Now, what this is about is just simple. It's very simple. It's the extent to which we are lost in thoughts about me. We become deaf and dumb to the world around us. I mean, if you're really, really lost in a thought, like you're having this anxious, terrible, horrible thought that's so gripping and painful, and somebody could come right up to you and say your name and you don't even notice them. How many times? We've all experienced that, right? And they have to shout your name. John! You know, like that. Come back! You know? Lost in thought. And there, actually, I've done some trainings. And one of them I've talked about a number of times here, but I'll say it again. There's a training on how to listen. This is used by people who are in therapeutic disciplines, and they're listening to clients, coaches. This is the way I learned it, learning how to coach. And there are 3 modalities that are taught for listening. The first modality is, it's like somebody says to you, I just had a terrific lunch at Zabar's. And you say, oh, I know Zabar's. I've been to Zabar's. I've had some great meals at Zabar's. They say it and you bounce immediately into your own interior. And you lose track of that person. You're no longer interested in what they felt and what they experienced at Zabar's. You might not have even heard what they actually ate, because you're already thinking about how you ate that terrific pastrami sandwich at Zabar's. You know, that's self-referential listening, and it's the worst kind. You're deaf and dumb. You're lost in thoughts. The person says something, and you immediately bounce back inside and start thinking about me. What have I done? The second kind is kind of like shamatha. And when I was taught this, the analogy that was given was 2 lovers sitting across a table having a moonlit or a candlelit dinner. And they're totally focused on each other. It's like tunnel vision, focus, like a flashlight beam. That's shamatha, the focus. And then there is listening to the other. But the third kind is the best kind, and that's vipassana. That's you're aware of the person you're listening to 3-dimensionally in time and space. Your awareness is wide. Not only that, but you begin to get curious. Curious is a terrific virtue. Trungpa Rinpoche said that in the Vajrayana, the last stage of the path, prajna, that what's called transcendent wisdom, super knowledge, becomes curiosity. And the reason is the practitioner is no longer concerned with trying to escape from suffering. They're just totally here. And totally here, there's nothing to do except be curious and interested and responsive to the world. And that's what happens in that third stage, and that is the virtue of being a really good therapist or coach. You are listening to the other person, and you're actually paying attention to the nuances of their speech, to the way in which their words are phrased and the tone of the emotion that lights them up. And if you're in front of the person, you're watching their body language and their eyes, and you can actually begin to read that person's mind. I mean, not to get too woo-woo about this, but you can pick up on things that are happening that you would have missed completely if you were in the self-referential kind of learning. That is what he's talking about here. That when you are lost in thought, the thought of I, you become deaf and dumb to the world. You just lose your sensitivity. And when you have awareness, you become much more intelligent and smarter about everything, the quality of the day, the person you're talking to, all kinds of things. You become much more intuitive. I find that on those times when I feel like I'm more present, funny things start happening, like coincidences that I notice that I don't notice the rest of the time, when I'm lost in my own self-reflections and self-concern. And I wish I'd write them down. Sometimes they're just totally weird, as though the universe were speaking to me and giving me little hints. I see people nodding, Isn't it weird how those things come out of nowhere? and just speak to you about something you never thought, and they don't make any logical sense. And yet, they're very powerful. They can be. So then he says, the experience of this egolessness begins to light things up. This is what, Trungpa Rinpoche talked about in the Shambhala teachings, that the world begins to become brighter. And you see this a lot at Datan. When you're at Datan, if you're a meditation instructor at Datan, I'll bet, have you been meditation instructors at Datan? Yeah. And you notice, twice, really? And you notice how, we always notice at some point in, like 10 days, 2 weeks, some people would start complaining about how bright colors were, And it's because they don't notice it, but thoughts are thinning. And the actual phenomenal world begins to brighten up. Trungpa Rinpoche talked about this a lot. He talked about it as being becoming attuned to the basic wholesomeness, goodness of this world, and the vividness of the phenomenal world. All of that has to do with cutting through ego and coming present. Shamatha and vipassana. The shamatha is the cutting through of thought. The vipassana is the relaxing into this open awareness, which is not my awareness. It's like the movie screen in an empty theater. It's like the television in an empty room. Just glowing, without I there. He talks about getting greater head and shoulders. This is one of the virtues of sitting up straight when you meditate. It's like there's this quality, mind follows the body. And when we sit in a upright, sort of dignified, or uplifted kind of way, our minds tend to follow us. And then here's a beauty. He says, and with vipassana, quote, possibilities of cheerfulness happen. Such cheerfulness is not only a state of mind, it is a tool to cut through your I want-ness. That's worth reading again. This is so important for those of us, especially as we go into the last stages of our lives, who are so prone to depression, loss. We talk about all the things that we're losing, our health, our love, and then all the things, the people around us who are suffering, people who are dying, becoming ill. And we can get mired in the depression, especially in the last stages of life. And he's saying that when you begin to practice this way, you begin to develop cheerfulness. Cheerfulness, sometimes, I've begun to practice together with some people online in the mornings. And we do it on Zoom. A lot of people are doing this on Zoom. And we meet at 9 o'clock and we do the chants and then we practice together, just like we did here. And I have one friend in particular who constantly tells me, cheer up. And sometimes I'm sitting there and I've just come out of dream. When you come out of dream, a little while before, you're lost in mental events. In fact, I was just talking with a friend of mine about this tonight, a very experienced meditator. I want instruction on how to work with dreams because I'm a victim. When I'm in the dream state, you're just lost in this mental realm. And you should be prepared because when you die and you're in the bardo of becoming, it's similar. It's just a mental realm. And you can be the victim of your dreams, your mental events. And then when I wake up, I start thinking. I get lost in thoughts. I'm lying there in bed. And those thoughts can be very dark. So when I sit down and my friend says to me on Zoom, cheer up, I can be going, like this, It can be so goddamn hard to cheer up. And yet cheering up cuts through ego. It really does. It's essential. There's no ego in cheering up. It's like an embrace of your life, of the world, of this panoramic awareness without a watcher, without a seer. That's just here that he's talking about. It's cheerful. So I'm saying you this because Trungpa Rinpoche used to look out at us. Remember this, those of you who knew him? And he used to say to us, please cheer up. Please cheer up. He used to say that to us. And I was always wondering why, you know? Why is he telling me this to cheer up so often? So we could help each other to cheer up.
He said also a really funny thing about cheering up. He said you could just fake it.
Said what?
He said you could fake it also.
You can fake
You
it.
can just fake it. Like, start with that. Just fake it.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what he meant.
I thought that was brilliant because
Yeah.
often, like, you get mired in your own storyline.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I'm not fucking cheer up. I'm sorry.
Right. I'm not going to cheer up. I can't cheer up. My face won't do it. Yeah, right. He said fake it. Yeah, I asked him about this once in another context. I asked him, sometimes you practice generosity and it's kind of pious. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to be a good person. And I said, there's a lot of ego in that. I said, should you even bother? His response was, and this is to your point, sometimes gestures can be magic. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah.
This stone project is about,
What?
this stone project actually is about limitless generosity. That's the seed syllable of it.
Seed syllable of generosity?
Well, that's what it arises out of. It's the paramita of generosity.
We should be using the mic. Anybody can? Huh? Rochelle, do you have the mic? Oh, and you're putting batteries in it. Good, thanks. Partly so I can hear, but also for the recording.
Sort of the inspiration of this is that paramita, which is the paramita that produces peace. Generosity.
Pointing to a stone here from Cape Breton Island.
Yes. It's a very lovely stone, just the right way, shaped to be generous all the time. It's never not generous.
Okay.
Even a moment. It's astounding. And what's great is,
Nice.
yeah, it's got this, you can trip over it. It's silly.
So, he says this I is invalid. It's out of order. And he talks about how, he says, you have sacked yourself. I like that. It's sort of British, fired yourself, got yourself out of a job. Every time you come present, you have sacked yourself. Therefore, want is no longer workable. It is obsolete. That is a basic understanding of egolessness. Rather than discuss it philosophically, I think the best way to understand egolessness is from the point of view of practice. There are lots of philosophical explanations of egolessness that we could go through. It's the 5 skandhas and the 12 nidanas and the Dharma theory and shunyata, and all of that stuff. And he's saying the best way is through practice, this practice of coming present. That's the best way to understand egolessness. That's the only place ego dissolves. It doesn't dissolve, because you talk yourself out of it through some philosophical argument. It dissolves because you continually come back, one does, for one's life. He says it produces tremendous fresh air and freedom. And I think I'm going to stop there. Sometimes Judy took different talks from different seminaries and combined them. And I can really see that stitching in this talk because it starts going into some stuff that wasn't related to the first part. But this is really beautiful. He says, with mindfulness and awareness, you realize that there is no need to fight or wage warfare. Boy, it's so tempting to do that. Somebody pisses you off and you just leap into action. And the words come blurting out of your mouth. Attack, warfare. But with mindfulness, it cuts that. And it makes you much smarter and more intelligent. And he says this practice produces tremendous relaxation, gentleness, and peace. These things were in us already. And we realize that we are capable of being decent and gentle through this practice. It's really something. that we don't have to push so hard to maintain ourselves, which only makes us deaf, dumb, and blind. We could open our eyes and listen with our ears. We could feel the universe around us, and we could be curious about everything in front of us, everything we experience. Curiosity. You see, that's, I think, prajna in Vajrayana becomes curiosity. Isn't that an amazing idea? You're just curious about the phenomenal world. So I think I'm going to stop there. He starts talking about this chapter about egolessness of I and other. And, okay, Rochelle. Do you have the mic? It's such I think, so important a chapter in that book. It's so helpful, this chapter. I'm speaking for myself personally. This constant injunction just to come back for one's life. Come present. Letting go of I and other. Letting go of all that. I mean, it's scary, too, because you're sort of leaping off a cliff into nowhere. You're giving up planning and self-protection and all that stuff. You know, there was this tagline that went around on people's emails, quote from Rinpoche. He said, the bad news is you're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no ground.
Actually, the quote is...
Huh?
The actual quote is that
You've
you've been thrown out of an airplane.
been thrown out of an airplane?
Without a parachute.
Okay.
Good news is there's no ground. That's the way I heard it. I don't know if you noticed that.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause that's more visceral. Like, that's just like, you're tossed out there, and where there is, there's no ripcord. There's no, but the good news is there's no ground. Anyway, it's the same thing. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Basically, Rochelle's fixing the mic, Peter. No, because then it won't show up on the recording, and I'm hard of hearing. And you need help with that mic, Rochelle? Maybe the batteries aren't good. I can do it.
No, you can't. I'm not going to let you.
Okay. You look good in those glasses.
Now incorrectly. It doesn't work now. We're going to have to do a plan B. And we're going to have to let Peter speak for all of us because he's an actor and has a beautiful speaking voice. Yeah.
Rochelle, put the thing on.
I don't need audio assistance.
I think it might need...
This is so funny that this is going to talk about listening. Yeah, that's great.
No, we can't pass this around.
I'm not going to say anything about
No.
Huh?
No. But while people talk, there's some batteries in my suitcase. Yeah, I think the batteries are dead. And there are batteries in my briefcase there. Okay, Peter, go ahead. You project.
What I was just thinking of another way to express this, the kind of lunacy of always wanting to have an object with this obsession. In other words, always having some place to put your unhappiness. Understand what I'm saying? Whether it's on another person, don't do anything, all my grievances, all my, of all my grievances and all my complaints and all my resentments and all my worries and so on, they're not there. If I just relax and I'm in the present and relieve myself somehow of this overriding compulsion to do something about my unhappiness. But it's the very effort of doing, I think, that really causes the unhappiness. Make sense?
Yep. 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 That habit.
I wanted to address what you said about gesture. I think it's very important to understand that that's a very profound thing to know about.
Gesture.
Gesture. Because sometimes it's just a slight gesture without saying anything, doing much, but it's just a slight gesture towards someone that really makes a huge difference in someone's life. For instance, today, I went into the bank, and when we go into the bank in my neighborhood, there are chairs right in the front where people sit. A lot of times there are senior citizens just hang out there. And there was a woman, a very old woman, who was rummaging through her purse. And I just glanced at her, and I noticed that her nose, like she had this big water drip hanging right on the tip of her nose. You often see elderly people have that. And just reached into my bag, pulled out a tissue, and I just handed it to her, and then I walked away. And she took it. And that was the end. But just a little gesture like that, I think, creates a stream of peace and like basic goodness or well-being in the world. You don't have to say anything or notice anything. Just offer something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Does anybody else, because I'm never here. This is my first time here, and I'm really happy to be here. And also I want to thank you so much, because that was so skillfully done, and I feel very honored to be here and very fortunate, just by chance. And I've been contemplating this very thing because I have a 16-year-old daughter, and the first thing that I've been contemplating very deeply about is the teaching on hearing, contemplating, and meditating. And this tonight was very helpful. And listening, like how to listen. How do you create that space so that you can actually have that focus, that openness, and that curiosity just develop? And I'm like, when you're 16, as my daughter is, you can see how fast the mind goes, and so when you have that, then you actually hear, and then from that you can contemplate, you can chew on it like a meal, you can taste your food properly. And then the meditation aspect is then you can actually be fully present with whatever arises, and then you can let go. And how to transmit that to a 16-year-old is my koan right now. So if you have any advice, I'm looking for it.
You made me think of something very interesting, because I have a 20-year-old son. And when 20? You said, yeah, he's 20. When you said cheer up, that's the key to it. Because I have read some old, weird Japanese novels. So it's like paperbacks, because they're very different than how we think of things in the West, in America. And I realized this thing. And also, I just got certified as a dog trainer, and they're behaviorists. So they're very different than psychologists. So the thing is, they say change the context. If you want the behavior to change, you change the context. So I started to think about that. Because when you focus too much on how somebody's feeling and why they're feeling that way and what's going on with them, you're just going down the rabbit hole of the emotions. But when you say cheer up, and the person doesn't keep going down that rabbit hole, all of a sudden what they were thinking about is like impermanent. And you just kind of like your mind starts to realize, well, my feeling and my thoughts are not a solid thing. Because you start to like give the experience that it's not solid. So, I mean, like we're very focused on our emotions and our ideas and our thoughts, and we try to cure it with more ideas and emotions and thoughts. But when you just drop it. So anyway, with my son, a lot of times when he's going through stuff, I tell him, well, yeah, you have to just like keep it in perspective, because it used to be different 5 years ago. Because when you're 20 and you think about being 15, it was really different. He's like, oh, yeah. But I was 15. Well, I said, when you're 25 and you look at 20. So it's just, I think it's good to leave things alone and try to just have it in a perspective, because it changes the paradigm. Because we're so much into, why do you feel that? Oh, I'm depressed. What are we going to do? Nothing. You don't have, it's going to go away. Anyway, so that's good. Yeah.
I think there actually is sort of physiological proof that actually, it's like just taking a deep breath, relaxing the hora, as they say in Zen, or I think it's just Josh Korda talks a lot about that. Put a big smile on your face. It takes the body out of the fight or flight mode, which actually creates a lot of deeper emotional stuff. But just step out, be cheerful, can cut through a lot of that stuff. So it's a very similar thing, right? I'm not saying that it's not worth, like, if you're a deeply troubled person, to not work on that stuff. But you're exactly right. Right. Anyway, that's another answer.
I disagree with that. I think I will agree a little bit more with Trungpa Rinpoche when he says we should not try to lubricate our experience or lubricate. We always want to lubricate things, lubricate samsara, lubricate nirvana, lubricate our experience, Just go fully, experience whatever you're going to feel. Don't build up any tools, any special, like, hidden swords that you can come up with, to face your experience. That's what I would say. By the way, a question about the last class, sort of related to this. I forgot the name of the person who came over to give us a class, but he was talking about a sort of...
Oh, Harry?
Yes, of practices that are actually taught or teach to see this dualistic, or work with dualistic. Honestly, I forgot the name of it. Does it come anything? Yeah. What's that?
I don't know what.
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Because we were talking about ego, and he said there are actually a bunch of practices. He turned to you, and he said there's a bunch of practices that are given. No, a different one. That sounds sort of like it. Anyway, yeah, sort of.
What?
To sort of face clearly this dualistic thought when it's arising, when it's present, when you don't sort of like.
I'm not sure.
No.
Sorry.
All right.
We'll get Harry back.
Yeah, I'll try to hear the
Okay.
teaching again to
I'm gonna be
get
calling you
the
soon.
name. It was Tibetan, so I couldn't really get it.
Okay.
And one more question, I guess. Trungpa Rinpoche, did he ever teach about yoga dreaming or anything about dreaming?
About which?
Dreaming.
Dreaming. You know, I don't know that he did. I don't think so. I don't think he taught dream yoga. No. Not that I know of, but I can't be sure. Might have mentioned it, yeah. But I mean, dream yoga is quite involved and difficult, and it's not a trivial practice. Takes some application, because what you're doing is, first of all, you start out with the ability to dream consciously, to know that you're dreaming. That's the first prerequisite. Most of us don't even know it when we're dreaming. We're just lost in the dream, and you have to be able to sort of wake up within the dream. And then beyond that, there are practices having to do with shaping the dreams, controlling them. I don't know much about it at all. And in fact, funny coincidence, I guess I brought it up because of it, I was talking with a friend of mine. I'd love to have her and her partner come here and teach. Her name is Sange Khandro.
Oh my God, I went to Tibet with her twice. She's like just an absolute artist. Yeah, she is.
She is.
And Lama Chinam is her partner still in New York.
Right.
And he's a dear friend. I was his personal secretary. Really.
Your personal secretary to whom?
Lama Chinam when he first came over.
Yeah.
He's an amazing dear friend.
Right. Yeah, they're...
Is she around?
No, they're in California. I mean, California, Oregon, that's where they live. But huh? She's a pistol. She is the, I refer to her as, for those of you who remember Terry and the Pirates, and there was this Chinese woman, and she always she was very beautiful, and she was kind of a Matahari type, and that's what Sangha is like. She's sort of the Matahari of Buddhism. She's fierce, and very knowledgeable Buddhist. She teaches Chud a lot. That's the practice of cut. She's been, they used to come more when their teacher was sometimes in residence here, but he died. And it's not just her, it's her partner. She's partnered with a man named Lama Chinam. He uses the term Lama to refer to himself, but he's actually a Khenpo. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, that's what Gyalto Rinpoche told me. And Lama Chinam is just too modest to use the title Khenpo, which makes complete sense when you know him. And he's very learned. And she is an American, Sangye, who went to India when she was like 17 and practiced with the Nakpas. The Nakpas are the guys who are out in the forests with some ash-smeared bodies and, wild tantric practices. And then she learned Tibetan and became a translator. And I think, as near as I can tell, I mean, my Tibetan is small, but she seems to me to be one of the finest, maybe of all oral translators there is. My teacher, Khenpo Namdrol, won't teach without her and Lama Chinam. Huh?
Peter Allen probably her two most
Extraordinary translator. She can sit and listen to Khenpo Namdrol go on for 5 or 10 minutes in Tibetan, and she just takes a few little notes, and then she repeats it all back. I mean, how do you do that? If he was speaking English, I couldn't do that. So anyhow, but she's terrific and wonderful, and I love them both very much. And I called her today, and one of the things we talked about was dream yoga. Dream yoga. And it's not easy to get to.
The first step is to recognize.
Huh?
The first step of dream yoga is to recognize that this
Is a dream. But the first step really is to get permission to view the teachings, to see those teachings, because they're advanced teachings and they're restricted. And so you have to work with a lama who will give you permission, or you can come across some of the Americans who are studying this and are quite open with it. There's a fellow, help me, he's from Boulder. Yeah. Huh? Andrew Holacek, who's written a lot about it. Right. Andrew Holacek, yeah. Have you read his stuff?
Not much, a little bit.
How do you find it?
I haven't read enough of it to really say, but it's very, very knowledgeable.
Yeah, he's really made it as... Huh?
Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche has a book, Little Dream.
Okay. Say that.
I took his
Microphone.
retreat.
There it is. So,
Oh,
Ellen.
mine.
Is that-
Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan
was he Bun?
Bun
Yeah.
Dzogchen. I mean, seems somewhat seamless, but anyway, he's a very skillful, very clear teacher, and he has a book on dream yoga amongst his several books. And I was saying I once took that one into retreat with me, and tried it a little bit, but it didn't come too easily to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Rochelle? And then maybe we'll end. We have.
I studied for many years with Khenpo Tsiltrim Gyabto Rinpoche, and he taught a lot about dreaming. And he said that you can attain enlightenment just by dreaming. Like he talked about this one very
He said
famous
you can what?
attain enlightenment just by sleeping and dreaming. That there's one yogi who just fell asleep in the middle of a road in India, woke up 13 years later, and he was enlightened.
Right. He was one of the 84 siddhas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, the way he described it was, I mean, I can just try to say, he said, if you're dreaming and you know you're dreaming while you're in the dream, then you know that even when you're dreaming, you're in a mindful state. You're mindful when you're awake and when you're dreaming. And the most important thing to know is that not to differentiate. He always used to say, see the equality of all things. Everything is equal. So when you're in the waking state, you could see it as also a dream. Because when we're in the waking state, we take everything to be real. And when we're sleeping, we think it's just a dream. But in fact, it's all equal, whether you're sleeping or you're dreaming. The important thing is to know that that's the way it is, and not to differentiate between the two. And I think that in terms of dreams, there are different types of dreams. Some are just ordinary dreams that we have no awareness of, and then there are profound dreams. A lot of times you have profound dreams when you're in retreat, because you're practicing a lot. So, I don't know, sometimes before I go to sleep, I'll say to maybe Trungpa Rinpoche or somebody, I'll say, can you please visit me in my dream and give me some teachings? Or I'd like to hang out with you or see you or something like that. And then I at least make an aspiration prayer that might happen. So I don't think that we're supposed to make a big deal about dream yoga or dream sleep, being asleep or being awake, but see the equality, that it's all equal. The most important thing is to, as you say, being in the present moment and being aware of what's going on.
Okay. Well, let's end now. And we'll just end by dedicating the merit. Okay. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of Samsara, may I free all beings, by the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound